Di, thank you for being with us today.
It's my pleasure.
Now look, we want to talk about weight loss because we're coming into the spring when everyone's wanting to lose a few kilos. So what would you say are some of the most common obstacles people face when trying to lose weight?
Losing weight's a very, very, very complicated subject, and the reality is, in my belief, if it was simply all about the food and the exercise, you'd see a whole lot more fat people. Because what I usually explain to my patients is, believe me, skinny people aren't always doing it right. And if you go into a food court or you go to a restaurant, you'll see skinny people eating some of the most ridiculously hideous foods, and the poor old bigger person is struggling, you know, often eating very little. So you know, we do know it's input-output, but it's a lot more complicated than that, especially with women, especially perimenopause, and especially around menopause. The whole hormonal system, you know, what's going on in a woman's body is totally changing around that time. So it's kind of nice to know that it can be a little bit more complicated. So I've got this wonderful, that I will refer to these notes because I don't really want to miss anything here, and it is just a handout that I do give women, and I'm sure we can probably get this put up on the actual video itself so that others can have a look at it. So we break it down to the energy in situation. So that's what you're eating and so forth. So in energy in is basically large portion size is one of the contributing factors. So we're just eating too much, okay? And a lot of that comes about because our plates are that much bigger now. And when you've got this big, huge plate, you really think that you need to fill it up. So first thing I'd suggest is, you know, get a smaller plate. The affordable energy dense food. A lot of people are going through a lot of financial issues these days, trying to feed families and so forth. So understandably, some of the cheaper foods are some of the more energy dense with not so much nutrition. So we're looking at things like white rice and pasta and breads and things like that are quite cheap, and we're eating a lot more of those, and that's just helping us to, you know, make ends meet really, and that's another reason. Also stress and mood. So we tend to love chocolate when we're stressed. We love a glass of wine when we're stressed. A lot of people love fatty foods when they're going through things like adrenal fatigue. So we tend to grab foods from an emotional point of view. So that's another thing that's happening on the food coming in. Also, blood glucose dropping tends to be that when our blood sugars get low, as you know, you don't feel like a piece of lettuce when your blood sugars have dropped. You really want something quick that's going to hit the mark, and it tends to be, again, chocolate, snack bars, things like that. So those are all contributing factors to what we're actually eating as to, you know, putting on weight. The energy itself, so the fat itself, where it's sitting, also it has a factor in why we can't lose weight, because fat is a storage unit of certain hormones, and that can affect us. So insulin resistance is a big one, and I will explain insulin resistance a little bit later, because I think that's something that a lot of people don't really understand, and it's one of the reasons why we are putting on that midriff fat. The chronic inflammation, so whenever we're inflamed from food choices, from even injury, things like that, the fat itself, so it's like a little estrogen production factory that's quite inflammatory, and that is stopping us from losing weight as well. So when we're in an inflamed state, we can't lose fat. When our pH is, when we're not alkalized, we can't lose weight. So all of those things are in that fat itself. Stress, back to stress. Obviously when we're stressed we make cortisol, and when we make cortisol we make a fat cell, and the reason that happens is cortisol short term is fine for us, but in a long term it's quite dangerous. So our body's very clever, and what it will do is make a fat cell to store that dangerous, well, it can be, you know, it's actually really helpful to us, but it can be dangerous to us. So the cortisol will be found stored in that fat. So when we actually take the fat around here, biopsies of it, we know that stored in there is insulin and cortisol. So we know that that person has probably been a bit of insulin resistance going on, or eating far too much carbohydrate, or they've been under lots of stress. Also gut toxicity. So if your gut is very toxic, your liver is overloaded, your ability to burn that fat off is not working right, then you're just not going to lose the weight as well. So having often, you know, clearing up that liver first of all, of course that's where we break down a lot of our fat. That needs to be, that's a big contribution to why we're not losing it. Environmental chemicals and endocrine disruptors. So anything in the environment that can actually also stop us. So straight away there's a list that's huge as to reasons why we may not lose weight very easily. The energy outside of things, so the contributing factor to the energy out. So obviously you eat, then you should metabolize and the energy should be burned. And what will stop that happening is that sedentary lifestyle. So lots of people I find will go to the gym, sure, but then they're sedentary the rest of the time. So you'll find everybody like bees around a honeypot wanting to park right by the supermarket door, or they don't ever use the stairs, they're always using the lifts and things like that. So I think we find that sedentary side of just your general life is another reason. So just that hour in the gym is not enough. You need to park your car far away, you need to be using the stairs and going back to walking as much as we can, all those sorts of things. The low muscle mass, I often ask, men are pretty good about this, they understand this, but women typically don't. I always ask, where do you think your metabolism is? And obviously we're metabolizing food in the gut, but the biggest part where we're metabolizing is in our muscle mass. So when you've got very small muscles, you've got a smaller engine, so you need less fuel, so you need less calories, so you're not going to burn as much. So a bodybuilder could be sitting here with us today and burn far more calories than you and I will ever do, because both of us are leaner in muscle than what a bodybuilder is. So that muscle mass is a big reason why women especially aren't losing their weight. Fatigue, if you are fatigued, obviously there's adrenal fatigue, but there's also fatigue from a lower thyroid function, and you do need that thyroid to be functioning because that's part of the metabolism in the muscle mass. So that T3 from the thyroid itself is actually metabolizing that using our food for energy, I suppose, is the simplest way to explain that. A slow metabolism, so when we're talking about a slow metabolism, also that's the thyroid involved there, so we do need to make sure that our thyroid is working well, because it's a part of that whole picture, and there are simple tests to check if the thyroid is functioning well. Endocrine imbalances, so again, what we have is endocrine is our hormonal organs. So we're looking at the thyroid, looking at the adrenals, and looking at the ovaries. So if there's any imbalance there, that's another reason why we may not lose our weight. And lack of dietary phytochemicals, so lack of eating enough nutrition, lack of eating vegetables, those sorts of things is another reason. So to recap on that whole long-winded thing that I just told you, basically the energy in, so we're eating too much, we want to watch our portion sizes and so forth. What the fat itself, so our fat is making us fat, so what's stored in there is a contributing factor, and the energy out, so how much output we're doing. Some of it we can control, some of it we can't. So there's quite a complex, a lot more than just I'm eating too much and not exercising, as you can see from what I just went through. But what I mentioned earlier, I like to everyone to understand insulin resistance. So how do we really get fat? That insulin resistant component. So typically what happens is you'll eat a meal, and most meals will have some form of carbohydrate in. So the carbohydrate will go in and spike our blood glucose. From there, your pancreas will make some insulin to bind to the glucose, which then brings it down to a safe level, because too much glucose in the blood is dangerous, and the insulin's job is to actually attach to that to make it, to bring it to, so that it's not so dangerous, I suppose, bringing it down. Then from there, glucose and insulin go through to the cells and are metabolized for energy. That's in an ideal world. But what can happen sometimes is that we can eat far too much carbohydrate, so we get far too much glucose, and then we get far too much insulin for the body to handle. So when they go, and incidentally, glucose can only get into a cell when it's holding insulin's hand. If insulin's not there, glucose can't get into the cell. So if there's far too much of it, it's just too much work. So it floods back into the bloodstream, and we now know back in the blood that it's actually quite dangerous for us to have too much glucose and too much insulin. So the body makes a backup mechanism, and that backup mechanism is a fat cell, and where it happens to make that fat cell is right around here. And so that's why we start to get that fat happening around here when especially in those sort of around 40 tends to be when most people are complaining of it. So that's the first part of insulin resistance. The second reason is that we're actually getting more and more resistant to the insulin. Okay, so now you don't even need to eat much carbohydrate. You may be just eating things like, first instance was eating lots of bread and things like that, okay? But what can happen now is that even eating lettuce, even eating your vegetables, which they're good carbohydrate, but it is still carbohydrate. When you're actually eating things like vegetables, which typically wouldn't put weight on you, you can even find yourself in that situation of putting on fat because the insulin resistance has just got that much, you just got that much more insulin resistant. So now you're eating that good salad or those vegetables, it spikes your blood sugars, not quite as much as what you were with the bread. The insulin comes out, and because we're getting resistant to insulin, it's like you're not hearing the message, your own body's not hearing it. So we're sending a whole lot more insulin than we really need. So when that comes down, then the cells themselves are just not taking in that insulin as well as they should be. And so it floods back into the bloodstream like there was a ton of carbohydrate from the start or a ton of glucose from the start, yet there's not. And so the same response happens as we make those fat cells to store that extra insulin. It's not so much that there was a heap of carbohydrate in the first place. So that's the one that a lot of women will come in and say, look, I'm eating little or nothing, yet I'm still putting on weight. So that's one of the things that I would suggest, is that insulin resistance is something that we're really looking for, but also how stressed they are, because as I said earlier, with making extra cortisol, you make fat cells there as well. So you could just start your day with a cup of coffee and a few lettuce leaves at lunchtime, and if you're in an adrenal fatigue situation, you're going to make fat from the caffeine, and then you get to lunchtime, if you're insulin resistant, you're going to make more fat from eating lettuce leaves. So as I said, you know, it's not always about how much you're eating and how much exercise you're doing. So I just think that insulin resistant situation is important to know when you embark on doing any fat loss, and very, very simple things can help insulin resistance if it's in the very early stages of it.
So what is the optimal food intake each day? For example, calories, fat versus carbs versus protein.
Okay, a really, really good question, and I'm glad you brought it up, because I hate the calorie thing. I hate to be counting anything, and one reason is because probably on average, obviously, women want around 2,000 calories. We know that, okay? But if you're counting a calorie, you could probably, for 2,000 calories, maybe get a couple of king-size bars of chocolate. You know what I mean? So the reality is that counting a calorie is not really necessarily going to put you into a good diet. Also, when it comes to portions of protein, carbs and fat, one size doesn't fit all. Some people do really well on more protein than others, but what rule of thumb, I've got some rules of thumb to start with. Typically your gut is the size of a fist, and what we're looking at is that we don't want to eat any more than 2 fists of our protein and our carbohydrate component of our meal. You also want to look at an abundance of green on that plate. So you've got that third of the plate that is protein, probably almost, not quite, if we went 2/3 there'd be no room for anything else, but a heap of it is the green component to your plate. Then a little bit of the actual carbohydrates that are more to do with your whole grains and so forth, so brown rice and things like that. You could have a small portion of that sitting there. And we also want some good fat every time we eat. If the body gets good fat, it's more, it's happier to get rid of the bad fat. So, but it'll hang on to all of our bad fat because it wants fat, we need it. So if we're not providing good fat in our diet, we're not going to release bad fat from our body itself.
How may someone better control their appetite or sugar or carbohydrate cravings?
One of the first things you need to do is basically be looking at eating little and often. If you do as we've done today and eat first thing in the morning and then go a long time before you eat again, your blood sugars are going to drop. And so obviously you're not going to feel like a bowl of salad as much as you'd feel like something that is a more quick fix type situation when you get to that scenario. So eating little and often. Also for women, I find they need to eat a little bit of protein every time they eat. Protein basically keeps the sugar more controlled. So when you get your carbohydrate form of your diet, you're spiking, and after you spike you come down. Protein tends to be in the middle and it will keep you there all day. So it doesn't have to be a lot, it can be nuts and things like that, but a little bit of protein every 2 to 3 hours means you're not going to get the drops, so you're not going to go looking for the wrong food. Also, as the gut starts to shrink, we're so used to it being stretched out if we've been eating far too much, you're going to feel hungry all the time. As it shrinks, it takes 3 or 4 days before you actually start to realise that you don't need to eat as much, so that will improve. But if you're constantly craving carbohydrate, craving those foods that are the comfort foods, things like rolled oats, bread, things like that, you may be lacking in serotonin, and to take some 5-HTP is a really good way of controlling that, and it's worth trying just in those early days. Also, one of the things that we can do is make sure that we eat more slowly. And the reason being, it takes 10 or 20 minutes for your gut to realise that you're actually full, that you've been eating. But if you put protein and fat at the start of when you're eating, that message gets through to your brain in about 5 minutes. So slow down, savour your food. So if you can last for 10 or 20 minutes, by the time you actually get to the end of the plate, you'll be feeling fuller, so you're not looking for more. But also start with that good fat, start with that good protein, and by about 5 minutes, you're starting to feel that satiety. You're starting to feel like you actually have eaten and you're feeling quite good, so you're less likely to go back for more. So that's probably the best things that you can do. And have things in your handbag. A good idea is to have little snack bars that are actually protein bars, maybe some good healthy ones are available. Also nuts and seeds and things like that. Never get caught short where you don't have food to have that little bit of a snack, so you don't get those sugar drops. If you get the sugar drop, you're going to burn the muscle mass and you're not going to burn the fat mass, and when you do start to eat, you're going to put it back as fat where the muscle was. So that's one of the things that women hate the most. They know they go down in size, but of course you're going to go down in muscle mass, and then eventually when you do start eating properly again, that area where the muscle was is going to be filled back up with fat. So I know we don't want to be like that.
If someone's feeling they need a little bit of a boost with their weight management, what can you recommend?
Really important. What happens to a lot of people who are overweight is that for one reason or another they haven't been getting their nutrients through, either because they've been eating poorly, so they're not actually eating particularly well and not getting those nutrients there, or there's been a bit of a gut issue that they're not absorbing their food. So we used to say you are what you eat. Now we believe more so you are what you absorb. So if you're not absorbing nutrients, you could be lacking in nutrients. And if you're lacking, for example, in vitamin D, your body thinks you're in winter time all the time, and when it thinks it's in winter time, you carry the winter coat, so you're not going to lose weight as well. So some of the things that can help in a supplement form is getting a multi, just a good old-fashioned basic multi that has good vitamin D and that in it will certainly help, because when your body is given all the nourishment that it requires, it's more likely to get rid of things that it doesn't need. Also the good fats. If you're not a person that eats a lot of good fat in your diet, it does help. Again, if you put good fats in, you're going to lose bad fat. So an omega-3, very, very important. I prefer fish oil, but if you don't like to use fish oil, then maybe flaxseed oil or something like that is going to be really important as well. And also if you're feeling really, really fatigued, if you're fatigued, you're going to go for the wrong foods. So again, an adrenal supporter, a B vitamin is going to help you in those circumstances. And if your metabolism has slowed, I don't like anything that sort of like boosts you in an unnatural way, but it could be your metabolism from, say, your thyroid. So there are some thyroid supporters and things like that if you do know that your thyroid has been slugging. Again, that can be tested for you. So just looking at those support roles rather than something that is a weight management tablet. I hate anything that we think is like that quick fix. There is no quick fix to losing weight, there really isn't. But some support things can certainly make it so much easier for you.
And what about exercise?
I'm glad you asked me that, because exercise is really important, and we tend to think, again, back to the just calories in, calories out, and that if we're moving it's fine, but what we find is that that's not always the case, and we want some variety in that exercise. But especially a very busy, stressed person, if you go out and exercise when you're already stressed, you basically you've got stress hormones pumping, then you go and race around going, I've got to get around this block really, really quick because I've got to get home and make dinner and all the rest of it. You're creating more stress hormones while you're actually exercising, and so as we know, too many stress hormones, you're going to make a fat cell, so it's counterproductive. So you're really not even going to lose any weight when you're actually in that state for that form of exercise. So in those sort of circumstances, when you're actually really busy, feeling really stressed, feeling really anxious, you'd be far better to do something more relaxing to start off with anyway. So it may be starting with a gentle walk, calming down first of all, then getting into the actual run, or doing yoga that night, or doing some sort of meditation or something. You can lose as much weight in a yoga session if you are stressed than going off for a really big run. So that's the first reason. The variety is also that we can just get used to doing things, and the body just doesn't, it needs a little bit of change probably in order for it to actually shift some of this weight. So I like to break it down into 3 types of exercises with my patients. Obviously those relaxation types we've spoken about today. Secondly is basically putting some variety into the run. So when we're running, walking or jogging, that it's not the same pace. So whether you're a runner or a walker, it doesn't matter, but don't do the same pace all the way around. Typically the fat burning zone is also around that 30 or 40 minute mark, but it's not always necessary if you haven't got the time. And so what you want to do is, if you're a walker, maybe every second power pole, speed up. Or if you're a runner, maybe you need to sprint. So that you just get that sort of, it's fartlek training basically, and it's designed with really good reasons why it was designed, and it does make a real big difference. The third reason, last but not least, probably the most important, especially for women, is that we need to be doing the weight bearing exercise, so that muscle building. And as I said earlier, we need to have a good muscle mass in order to burn calories. And so often women don't like to go and build muscles because they don't like that bulky look, but until we get the muscles up, we're not going to burn the fat on the outside. And the metabolism's going to slow. So the smaller the engine, the smaller the metabolism, the less calories you need. So if you're having more calories than you should, you're just going to put on weight. So over a week, some days do some relaxing yoga, whatever you like, Tai Chi, it may even just be a stretch class, Pilates, something like that. Days in between, go for your jog, do your run, those sorts of things. But 2 sessions at least of weight bearing exercise, and you don't need to be a gym junkie, you can do that at home. So it only needs to be things like simple press ups and things like that, which are also going to help your bones, because we do need those weight bearing exercises for our bones as well.
A lot of people have that all or nothing mindset. They have 2 pieces of chocolate and then they think, I've ruined it now, and have a whole bar. What's your recommendation there?
Absolutely. I'm glad you brought that one up, because as I sort of mentioned to you a little bit earlier on, that we don't want to look at a diet as on a diet, off a diet. And when you've got that mindset of, I've just, I've eaten some chocolate, or I've eaten 2 biscuits, I might as well have the packet, you're not thinking the long term there. What we really need to understand is it's not what you do 20% of the time that's an issue to you. It's what you're doing 80% of the time. So if 80% of the time you're eating well, you're exercising, you're relaxing, you're doing all the right things, you should still be able to, over the long term, lose that weight that you want, or keep that healthy weight range. The 10 or 20% is not really a big deal. So if you start off with 2 biscuits, it's still in the 10 or 20%. But the minute you start eating the packet, it's moving over to your 80%. So you're not really looking at the big picture, and it is absolutely okay. And I always say, have a freedom meal a week. Have something that, don't deprive yourself, have some chocolate, do those things, and be prepared for it. Put it in your planning, know you're going to do it, and it's okay to have a couple of pieces. But the minute you actually move over to, I might as well have the packet, then you decide, well, I might as well wait till Monday. So then you're moving more and more and more. Now you're at a 50-50 sort of a situation, and you'll just never get there. And that again is, as I said, is back to that I'm on a diet, I'm off a diet. The reality is we want to start, say now, leaving from today, I have changed my life from today, and at times I'm going to eat chocolate, and that's absolutely fine. If your brain is prepared for it, it's not such a big deal, and the moment you do it, you say, well, that was that meal, I'm going to go to the next one, and I've just got to focus and do twice as healthy for my next meal because I had a piece of chocolate in the last one earlier today. So yep, so it's, I'm glad you came up with that one, because that's probably one of my pet things that I really like people to understand is this is you for life. And really how we look is what we really are doing it for initially, but that's not the big picture. The big picture is how we feel, looking younger, I suppose, but also that we actually remain healthy, and that's really how we should be focusing. And I think if you change that focus, you will get to those goals much better than just thinking of a diet.
Well, thanks, Di. That's some fantastic information on weight management and a lot of great tips in there that I'm sure a lot of people would enjoy.
Hopefully, and yeah, it's been my pleasure to be here today.